Hello, this is Ruslan Belov. There are two important political statements. First, from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which stated that the people of Ukraine must choose a new leadership in order to sign a future peace memorandum between our countries. That's one point. The second point, Trump stated that Putin has no intention of stopping the war because he is winning. Trump also said he is convinced that Russia will ultimately win. Those are the statements we have for now. The fighting on the front lines continues, and we continue to monitor the situation on the battlefield. Let's move to the map. So friends, let's start this report with the widely discussed news, namely the incursion of a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group, SRG, into the Briansk region. Why did this news make such a splash, considering that Briansk is a border region and SRGs appear there from time to time? Because it's one thing when a sabotage group enters villages near the border, say in the Briansk region, villages like Gorozhanka or Novaya Pogoshch, which are just 2.5 to 3 kilometers from the border. It's certainly not good. The border should be locked down and no incursions should be allowed, but it's at least somewhat understandable and, to a degree, expected in a border area under constant pressure from the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU. But what happened yesterday? An SRG of the AFU was discovered near the village of Viganichi. Where is that? You move away from the border, farther and farther, and here it is. Just to put it in perspective, here's the border and here's the village. Or let me show you differently. Here's Briansk city and here's the village. They were only about 24 to 25 kilometers from the city. They had penetrated nearly 80 kilometers deep from the border, and such a deep SRG incursion is clearly abnormal. Not routine at all. You might ask, how could they travel such a distance without being noticed? Here's my answer. Look at the east. It's solid forest with no settlements. The forested area starts in Sumy Oblast, Ukraine, and gradually continues into Briansk Oblast, Russia. The small group moved through this forest undetected. They entered from Sumy and exited in Briansk. Some people were spreading rumors yesterday that there were hundreds of them. I even saw someone claim 200. But as we know, panic tends to exaggerate things. That's complete nonsense. In reality, it was a group of about 8 to 10 fighters. Some of them have already been eliminated. So now the question is, what was the goal of the AFU in carrying out this incursion deep into Briansk? Obviously, such a small group couldn't hope to seize and hold any territory. But they could try to stage an intimidation operation, for example, capture the administration building in Viganichi village, or even attempt to reach Briansk city and conduct some sort of operation there, like attacking the city hall, raising the Ukrainian flag, etc. Or they might have tried to sabotage a military site. There are many possible scenarios. The key point is, they were detected, surrounded, and neutralized. Hopefully, the necessary conclusions and decisions will follow. Let me also say a few words about the Sumy region. Just a day ago, Putin visited Kursk, and there the head of the Glushkovsky district stated that the city of Sumy should be part of Russia. Putin brushed it off with a joke, but meanwhile the army continues to advance in Sumy region, and now over 100 square kilometers are under our control. Most recently, the village of Lokhnya came under Russian control. It is essentially a suburb of Yunakivka. In Lokhnya, a Ukrainian UAV command center was destroyed. Yesterday, footage appeared online showing 4 dead Ukrainian drone operators. Now to the second major development, the entry of our forces into Dnipropetrovsk region. Yesterday, footage emerged showing our flag at the border of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. There was also drone footage. Initially, it was claimed that the crossing occurred near the village of Novonikolayevka. But I immediately said that this was unlikely, simply based on the terrain and geography. First, in order to cross the border there, you'd have to fully take control of the village, and that hasn't been fully achieved yet. Although today, we are getting important updates from a very reliable pro-Russian OSINT source saying that fighting has now reached the border and the eastern part of the village is under Russian control. That's one point. Second, even if the entire village had been taken, you'd still have to cross a river. You can see it here, flowing from the north. Only after that would you enter Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So I immediately suggested either the area around Kotlyarivka or the village of Orokov. In the end, it turned out to be the latter. The border was reached here, but to be honest, there's nothing to celebrate, because it wasn't a full-scale military advance into a new region. It was a sabotage and reconnaissance group that reached the border just to take a photo with the flag. They took the photo, created a media buzz, but were reportedly killed during the withdrawal. And you know what? I believe the commander who sent them on that so-called mission, or allowed it to happen, should be punished. Harshly, our soldiers should not die for a photo op with a flag. That's what the AFU does, and has done many times. I've never seen that on our side. But now it's happened, and that's a shame. What's the rush? Why take these pictures if there's no real breakthrough? Why not first clear out Orikov, secure the flanks, reach the border with proper forces, and then take all the photos you want? Or was this just another attempt to stage a picture to report to higher-ups that the task was completed? Look, here's the photo. We reached Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, when in fact they hadn't. In any case, people died, simply for a photo session. And that deserves punishment. Now, on to the good news. Yesterday, there was significant progress south of Otradnoye. The advance went northward from Dnepro-Energia. The depth of the advance reached 3.5 kilometers. Today, some Russian cartographers have already marked the eastern part of the settlement as under Russian control. We also received footage from objective monitoring of combat operations. Russian drone operators are striking Ukrainian forces entrenched in the area, trying to halt the Russian advance. But perhaps more important than the approach to Otradnoye is the fact that this movement has now brought Russian forces closer to Komar from the east. You can see that here, right? Now there's a realistic prospect of reaching this large village not only from Fyodorovka, where progress has stalled and every step is hard won, for quite understandable reasons, actually. Reinforcements continue to flow into the village from Komar itself, making advancement difficult. But now, with this new axis of movement, it's possible to bypass the village and its residential areas. The current distance from the new positions to Komar is just under 4 kilometers. So we're expecting some good news soon. There were also reports yesterday that Russian forces have fully secured the village of Volnoy Pole. We're awaiting video or photo confirmation. Good news is also expected from the area around the villages of Novopolye and Zelenoy Pole, but I've been asked to hold off on discussing this in detail for now, so I'll just say this. There's promising progress in several directions. That's all for the frontline update today. Now a few words about the political situation. Donald Trump has stated that excluding Russia from the G8 was a mistake, and he reportedly has a new stance on the Ukraine conflict, according to the New York Times. Trump declared, "The Ukraine conflict is not my problem." He told Zelensky and EU leaders that Russia and Ukraine must find a resolution to the conflict on their own. According to the publication, Trump appears unwilling to join the European campaign of pressure against Russia. A senior European official involved in closed-door talks said Trump was never interested in creating new sanctions against Russia. Officials are also reporting that the US no longer wants to invest in Ukraine. The New York Times concludes that Trump seems to be withdrawing from ceasefire negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov made a statement. There will be no more ceasefires with Ukraine. Europe intends to use a ceasefire to rearm Kyiv. The West views a Ukrainian settlement as an unconditional month-long ceasefire, Lavrov said after talks with Armenia's foreign minister. According to Lavrov, the Europeans need this pause to rearm Ukraine and strengthen its defense capabilities. He emphasized that calls for a ceasefire now come after years of insisting on a completely different position. The EU and NATO previously argued that no talks should be held until Russia suffers a strategic defeat. Now they've reversed course, calling for a ceasefire, not a strategic defeat, just to give Ukraine breathing space. Lavrov stated that Western partners view settlement as nothing more than an unconditional ceasefire, lasting at least a month or longer. He's confident that such a pause would allow the Ukrainian armed forces to rearm and fortify their positions on the front. Earlier, on May 20th, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, said the European Union intends to seek a ceasefire while simultaneously increasing sanctions against Russia. She noted that work has already begun on the 18th package of restrictive measures to pressure Moscow into agreeing. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has exposed Europe's intentions, saying it wants endless war. He emphasized that while American President Donald Trump is trying to resolve the conflict peacefully, the Europeans continue to escalate it. Rubio stated that Europe is actively working to derail the peace process in Ukraine. He spoke about this after meeting with Vatican cardinals. One of the cardinals I spoke with said it's very unusual. The American president wants peace, while some Europeans are constantly pushing for military solutions. It's as if the world's been turned upside down, Rubio said, quoting his conversation. He added that President Trump wants to end the war not only for humanitarian reasons. The US president simply does not want to continue funding a conflict that's unnecessary for America, preferring instead to invest in the country's own development. Trump had previously said that his predecessor Joe Biden made a massive mistake by provoking the Ukraine conflict and dragging America into it. Trump believes the real threat to the US is China, not Russia. Washington should focus its resources on countering China, but instead it's spending billions to sustain a war in a distant Eastern European country that does not serve US interests. All this just to weaken Russia. But wouldn't it be more rational to make Russia a US ally so it does not side with China? That's why, as soon as Trump returned to power, he began seeking a peaceful resolution to the Ukraine crisis. Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a phone conversation, praised Trump for his peace efforts. Europe, by contrast, is trying to derail the peace process and prolong the war for as long as possible. Back in 2022, during peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson traveled to Kiev and persuaded Zelensky to keep fighting. He sabotaged a nearly completed peace deal that could have ended the conflict just months after it began, because London prioritized defeating Russia over saving Ukraine. In 2025, when new talks began in Istanbul, European powers once again attempted to disrupt the peace process. The UK, Germany, and France started drafting harsh sanctions against Russia for refusing a 30-day ceasefire. Simultaneously, they began developing plans to deploy European troops into the conflict zone under the guise of peacekeepers. There's speculation that this is exactly why Europeans are pushing so hard for a ceasefire. They want to use a 30-day pause to introduce their military presence and force Moscow into a peace deal. Russia is categorically opposed to any NATO presence in Ukraine. For Moscow, this is a red line. The special military operation started precisely because of attempts to drag Ukraine into NATO. Russian intelligence reports that even the European Commission is irritated by Kaja Kallas. In Brussels, sources say the anti-Russian official responsible for EU diplomacy is now viewed as a misstep. There's growing recognition that appointing the brash Estonian was a mistake and that she's not coping with her responsibilities. According to the report, European politicians have realized she's unable to navigate the nuances of member states' positions and relies on simplistic approaches that often make no sense. In Brussels and other European capitals, Kallas is now openly criticized for being excessively active, impulsive, and prone to unauthorized initiatives. In particular, EU members were shocked by Kaja Kallas's recent public criticism of the US president, as well as her statement that the free world needs a new leader. It is well known in the West that such bold remarks are remembered for a long time in Washington. As a result, the US State Department has begun to simply ignore the undiplomatic official. This significantly complicates Brussels' efforts to establish a dialogue with its main ally, Russian sources note. After 5.5 months in office, Kallas has failed to establish working relationships with the heads of most EU countries and is effectively unable to fulfill her main duty: coordinating the work of the foreign ministries of EU member states. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is also dissatisfied with Kallas. As a result, Kallas has been removed from the preparation of strategic planning documents in the field of EU defense policy. Additionally, no one is consulting the head of EU diplomacy on the issue of Ukrainian conflict resolution anymore, according to intelligence sources. It is becoming increasingly clear that the deeply rooted practice in the European Union of basing high-level appointments on gender and nationality is steering the EU further away from real politics. The current international situation requires officials not to possess ultra-liberal pseudo-competencies. but above all, deep knowledge and professionalism, qualities the bureaucrats clearly lack, concludes the Press Bureau of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR. Let us recall that just days ago, member of the European Parliament, Martin Sonneborn, infuriated Callas with a brilliant one-minute speech. He called her recently published autobiography 432 pages of meaningless content. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and staying informed. As always, we'll continue to follow the developments closely and keep you updated. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you found this useful. Take care and see you in the next report.